2, 3, 4.
Welcome, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. And so welcome to the New York Space Business Roundtable. We're looking forward to continuing our conversation on space facts that we started last month. A little bit of housekeeping notes. You are all on mute, and you will not be able to unmute yourself during the program, which will end at 1 p.m. with an optional question and answer segment that will run from 1 to 1:15. But while you are unable to unmute, you are welcome and encouraged to use the chat functionality of Zoom, which you will be able to find in your Zoom controls. And if there are any technical issues, you can always use the chat to reach out to myself or my colleague, Matt Owen, who is currently labeled SSPI Zoom. That means he's our tech person, and we will take care of it for you. With that, I'd like to bring Lou on to kick off the program.
Well, thank you, Tamara. And just a shout out to you. This is your 21st anniversary with the organization. So congratulations. You've given us a lot of satisfaction, actually, in a lot of different what you've done here. And you've kicked us off. It's the third Wednesday of the month, so it must be the New York Space Business Roundtable. My name is Lou Zaccarella. I'm the Director of Innovation with SSPI, and I'm joined by my good friend, the founder of the New York Space Alliance, Joe Fargnoli, again, who you'll hear from later as we get into a real conversation, as we do. Before we introduce our first set of guests, what I'd like to do is just to do a little bit of housekeeping. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office here in New York, for their support. Our media sponsor is Space News, and they have been with us since the inception, and you'll hear from them actually in the flesh a little bit later. We also are appreciative of the support of New Space New York, the Washington Space Business Roundtable, who are supporting partners of ours, and World Teleport Association, which, by the way, announced on March 2nd that Jim Veeder, the CEO of US Electrodynamics, was named the Teleport Operator of the Year. Congratulations, Jim. And WTA invites all of you here today to his 27th annual Teleport Awards luncheon on Tuesday at the Satellite Show. And you can visit WTA.org for more information. If you're an attendee of this program today, you are admitted for free. And of course, if you're a WTA member, you are also admitted for free. So it is the week before satellite, but it is something that is even much bigger than the return of satellite in the hopefully post-COVID era. We had planned to make this strictly about financing a commercial space and satellite company, and we will be focusing on that as we go forward here today. However, as things do in life, an unexpected moment arose, which has turned out to be the moral test of our time. Perhaps it is stress testing the entire notion of free and open societies and markets. The war in Ukraine will certainly impact the space and satellite industry. It already has, and we'll be talking about that today and its impact on financing with our special guests. Now, Tamara usually leads us into a video from our Better Satellite World campaign. But today, again, because of the unique circumstances, we thought it might be best to first listen to a voice who so calmly and rationally articulates the moment that I think it will set a context for us psychically and emotionally as we enter into this conversation today. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind playing that video for us.
Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules of the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Charter, not because our borders satisfied us, but because we wanted something greater, forged in peace. We believe that all states formed from empires that have collapsed or retreated have many peoples in them yearning for integration with peoples in neighboring states. This is normal and understandable. After all, who does not want to be joined to their brethren and to make common purpose with them? However, Kenya rejects such a yearning from being pursued by force. We must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back into new forms of domination and oppression.
So for those of you who haven't seen that, that is Kenya's ambassador to the United Nations here in New York, Mr. Martin Kimani. Ambassador Kimani, in case you think he's just, your everyday diplomat, has a PhD in war studies from King's College in London, and his doctoral thesis happened to be a study of the Rwandan genocide. So the ambassador knows of what he speaks. Okay, last month we started a new tradition here, the big question. And this is something that we ask now, and you can answer at any time in chat throughout the event. And then at the end, we'll have an open mic session so that everybody can discuss this. The question this month, is how will Ukraine impact the future of space financing? So that would probably be the obvious question to ask today. So give some thought to that. Give us your answers, your thoughts, your impulses on it as we go through, and we'll see what our experts have to say about it as well. Okay, so let's get talking here. We thought that we would begin today's roundtable by inviting two of our industry's finest journalists to share insights with us on the Ukraine war, the space and satellite industry, and what they are seeing as reporters or anticipating. So what I asked them to do was to come on for a few minutes and give us just their reports, just that pure journalistic snapshot that both of them are so excellent at giving. And so I'd like to introduce them now. I'd like to first of all welcome back Jason Rainbow, the senior staff writer at Space News. He moderated some sessions for us last year, and he's been a regular here. So Jason, welcome back home.
Thank you for inviting me back. It's great to be here.
Again, it's short notice. They both came. Deborah Werner, who many of you know from her work as the Silicon Valley correspondent of Space News. And so they are both with us today. And Deborah, it's great to see you as well. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
So Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you first. Obviously, you know what our big question is now. And I think a lot of people really want to know, what are you seeing fall out as a result of the war in Europe with regard to our industry?
Yeah, thank you, Lou. I'll be glad to. It's a topic we've been following very closely at Space News because, as you said, the war in Ukraine touches multiple parts of the space industry. It's a continuously evolving situation, but I'll give a very brief rundown of the impacts and some of the key themes we've seen for commercial SATCOMs, which is an area of space that I track closely. And then my colleague Deborah will paint a picture of implications for the Earth observation market. So one of the first things we heard about was what Viasat continues to believe was an external cyber event that knocked out modems for its KSAT satellite service as Russia started its invasion. More than 2 weeks later, they're still working to get everyone back online. Viasat haven't publicly said what exactly happened. They're still working with governments and law enforcement to understand all of that. But they do say the situation has now been stabilized. An official confirmed to us that hackers were able to remotely access the modems by exploiting a misconfiguration in the management section of the network. A source also said tens of thousands of users across Ukraine and Europe were affected. But according to a Viasat statement on Friday, there is no evidence to date of any impairment to the KSAT satellite, core network, infrastructure, or gateways due to the incident, and no customer data was compromised. Viasat call it a partial outage. They weren't able to give us an idea of how many people are still affected, but they say certain modems can be fixed with an on-the-air update, while others need to actually actively be replaced. And so on that note, SpaceX's Elon Musk revealed in early March that some Starlink terminals near conflict areas were being jammed for several hours at a time. And in response, they've issued a software update that he says bypasses the jamming. And he also said that SpaceX is shifting resources to cybersecurity to protect its Starlink satellites from jamming in times of conflict, which will mean slight delays for its second generation network and the Starship launch vehicle that's being developed to help launch the constellation. So the need to improve SATCOM's cybersecurity has been, I'd say, a big theme so far. Incidentally, SpaceX has also been supplying Ukraine with Starlink terminals during the conflict. And this raises interesting questions for the role of private commercial space companies in times of war, which I'm sure Deborah might touch on a bit later. There's a lot of that going on in the Earth observation market too. But for SpaceX, this is also an opportunity to get a foothold in Eastern Europe, where Starlink has been looking to gain market access for its increasingly global ambitions. So I'd say I think it's fair to say the war has boosted Starlink. The head of the US Space Command recently said that he has been impressed by SpaceX's ability to provide internet access in war-torn parts of Ukraine. So you've got to think this is a big boost for them as they seek permission for a second generation constellation of some 30,000 satellites. It's been less positive for the second biggest broadband mega constellation, OneWeb. Yes. However, so their hopes to finish the constellation to provide global services before they've been targeting the end of this summer. Those plans are now up in the air because they're seeking an alternative to the Russian Soyuz launch vehicle. They had 6 more launches booked through Arianespace to launch some 220 satellites to finish the network, all on Soyuz. Their latest batch of satellites was due to go up, I think March 4th from Baikonur in Kazakhstan. But in the days leading up to that mission, there was this incredible back and forth between the head of Russia's space agency and the UK government, which owns a golden share in OneWeb. At one point, the head of Roscosmos said the launch at the Russian-owned launch site would only go ahead if the UK divested its stake in OneWeb, and with a guarantee that the satellites would not be used for military communications, which of course is a sizable chunk of where they expect to get their revenues from. So the UK government said there would be no negotiation, and then OneWeb suspended all future launches on Soyuz. There are more than a dozen missions now seeking alternative rides, but OneWeb is by far the most affected by the Soyuz ban. We're told that no one launch provider will be able to absorb that kind of demand in the near term. And it remains to be seen whether SpaceX will lend them a hand, because SpaceX, Starlink, and OneWeb currently are targeting different initial markets. Starlink is more consumer broadband focused, while OneWeb is more enterprise. But analysts think as they continue to develop their businesses, they will increasingly overlap, particularly for government applications. So it's an interesting question how SpaceX will respond to this. And it's an interesting situation for OneWeb, and we're waiting to hear more. We know they currently have enough satellites in orbit to provide services to at least the upper parts of the northern hemisphere, but how important near-term global services are for OneWeb's business model remains to be seen. We don't know that yet. And then finally, elsewhere, Comtech, which is a satellite communications equipment maker, recently said in its financial results that it's taking $35 million out of its revenue forecast for 2022 after contracts in Ukraine ran into issues. We're waiting to see how often Ukraine shows up in other company revenue projections. But yeah, it's, like I said, it's a continuously evolving situation, a lot of unknowns. But that's my main takeaways for commercial satcoms. I'll now hand the stage over to Deborah to give us the picture for the Earth observation market.
Yeah, Jason, that was excellent. Thank you so much. Before Deborah, we go to you. I was going to ask you, Jason. We were going to ask you, what do you see as the economic fallout? I mean, the assumptive notion of it you explained, but I do want to ask you. I was going to ask you also, did the Russians actually put a hood over the OneWeb payload like they did the mayor of Melitopol? But
well, as this was playing out on Twitter, there were videos of OneWeb's library being taken down, and as we understand it, it's now in storage and being dismantled, effectively being held hostage over there.
Wow. Just quickly, Jason, what's your greatest fear near term with regard to the economic and financial fallout relative to what we might be discussing later today?
It's hard to say. It's hard. It's already having an impact. We saw, and you're going to be talking about SPACs later. We saw one SPAC called in the space industry called off due to market conditions and uncertainty resulting what's going on. But it's a complex picture because the very next day another space company announced SPAC plans. So yeah, it's a bit all over the place at the moment. But I just think general uncertainty coming so soon after the pandemic is going to perhaps pause a lot of projects that were already delayed. And then the knock-on impacts of the war, potential for rising energy prices, interest rate hikes and things like that. Right. That's my fear is projects that were already delayed, I can see them being pushed back even further. Yeah,
and we'll be asking Noel Rimlovsky and Keith Buckley more about that. But again, thanks so much, and again, thanks for doing this on short notice. Deborah, over to you on the Earth observation side. What are we seeing there?
Well, it's been a remarkable time for Earth observation. The people around the world are getting an overhead view of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine in a way that I have certainly never seen before. And it's been impossible to ignore. It's a time when people don't trust various news sources, but it's impossible to look away from these images. We've seen the armored convoy heading toward Kyiv. We've seen residential neighborhoods burning in Mariupol. And I wonder if that is part of the reason that companies have felt they needed to publicly declare what they were doing to support Ukraine. I just feel like it's brought it into people's homes in a new way. It's also revealed the value of synthetic aperture radar data it's the perfect use case because it's a war in Eastern Europe in the winter where cloudy skies prompted the Ukrainian Minister of Digital Transformation, Federos, to publicly ask on Twitter for SAR. And people responded. Not only did they respond privately, which I always assumed was going on, but MDA announced that they had Canadian government approval to support Ukraine. ISI issued a statement. Capella announced that they were supporting Ukraine, providing SAR. It's just a remarkable time. These things that we have followed at Space News and in the industry are coming into public view in a new way. Yeah. What it all means, we'll have to see. As a reporter, I can just follow that. But if I had to guess, I think that investors who may not have understood Earth observation and what they could apply it to, maybe getting a new view of that. I think that nations around the world, they've always wanted to have their own Earth observation satellites. This might give people extra ammunition to put those budgets together. And the biggest thing in the space industry right now is talent. And maybe this makes it easier for Earth observation companies to attract the talent that they need.
Interesting. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it could be in many ways a boon for the industry with regard to that as we talk at least about the longer term. Deborah, thanks so much for that. I also, Joe, before I hand it over to you, my colleague, Joe Fargnoli, you two are journalists. And one thing that has become real clear is how sacred almost your mission is, your work, your vocation. And I just want to thank you, as someone who reads you and follows you. The courage of the journalists around the world in this instance has been revealed, and their importance to a free society has been revealed like the lights of the galaxy. So, thank you for your report today, but thank you for what you do, guys.
Yeah, let me just echo that. Exceptional reporting all around, and I think you guys have given us a great lead in for today's conversation. We want to switch gears now and get down to a little bit more of a tactical level. We are seeing the value of commercial space in promoting open transparency, visibility, and hopefully in the cause of freedom and democracy here. Let's get down and talk about the working of the gears in space financing and what pragmatic approaches can be taken to help this industry continue to move forward successfully. Want to introduce two friends of mine who are exceptional participants in this new space industry. First, Mr. Noel Rimlovsky. Noel is a partner with New York-based GH Partners. They are a global independent investment bank. In Mr. Rimlovsky's 25-year career, he has provided advisory services to clients, including mergers and acquisitions of companies, restructurings, as well as debt and equity capital raisings. At GH Partners, Mr. Rimlovsky leads the firm's space practice and has completed multiple assignments for domestic and international clients in both the communications and Earth observation subsectors. Prior to joining GH Partners, Mr. Rimlovsky was at Macquarie Capital, where he led $1.8 billion in investments in communication infrastructure. Prior to Macquarie, Mr. Rimlovsky was with Weiserman, Perella, and Lazard, where he completed over $20 billion in transactions in the industrial, consumer, technology, telecommunications, media, and infrastructure sectors. Noel earned his MBA from Columbia Business School and a BA in quantitative economics from Tufts University. I also want to introduce Mr. Keith Buckley. Keith has been building and leading high-growth companies for over 20 years. Along with having started and successfully exited two of his own startups, including one in the satellite services industry, his primary focus is leading underperforming private equity portfolio companies through accelerated growth and on to highly profitable liquidity events. He has led a total of 5 exits, including 2 in the past 6 years that have yielded 4x and 5x ROIC for the company's PE owners. Keith's focus is on the technology, media, and telecom sector, including tech-enabled services, software, and high-tech manufacturing companies, with several involved in space and satellites. So with these 2 esteemed gentlemen with us today, we are going to focus in this conversation on the unique value that we are seeing that commercial space is playing in this conflict and others, and how commercial investment in space has produced a transparency that has allowed more of the world, both inside and outside of Russia, to see what is going on, to form their own opinions. The truth has been unsheathed and is available beyond the purview of government decision makers only. The truth in this situation demands an outcry over the monumental injustices being committed on the Ukrainian people. Let's discuss why anyone should consider investing in commercial space to help that. We believe it ushers in an era of transparency and collective understanding of reality by more and more of the population. Yes, more data to more people can also imply risk, but the dissemination of every major invention has carried analogous risks. And by and large, we have proven that far more often than not, society tends to forge those technologies into tools for good, advancing the interests of mankind. Perhaps with a few mistakes or missteps along the way, with more or less severity, but it's been shown that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, to quote a famous statement. And they tend to be integrated for the benefit of the common good. So with the urgency of the situation, with the exciting assistance that we've seen new space provide in this current environment, with these lofty ends in mind, I'd like to ask both Noel and Keith to comment on their perspective on the business realities, which must be met to provide the essential means of successful space businesses. So Noel, going beyond the loftiness of our objectives, can you talk about the state of space financing and perhaps the additional impetus of energy this current situation has provided in helping new space companies get financed?
Sorry, if you hear in New York, a few sirens in the background, so I muted. Yeah, thank you, Joe. Keith, good to be on the panel with you. And thank you to Jason and Deborah for an awesome introduction. It's absolutely a time for the industry to shine. It's also kind of from a financing perspective, we over the past 5 years have seen so many companies, form to do optical imagery, SAR, launch, and you hear kind of deprecating statistics. Oh, there's 165 companies pursuing launch. And this really kind of shows, wow, great that there has been this investment in the industry. There's going to be, hiccups, as was described with OneWeb. But it's also interesting to see that the industry is really kind of, using this as its moment to shine. People in the industry have a great sense of mission, which is why, even, rumors of SpaceX stepping up to help their competitor OneWeb. That's kind of really great kind of spirit there. Now, that being said, when you look at kind of the these companies whose time to shine is, you're not seeing a big bump in their share price. Think about SAR or optical imagery. I'm not sure. I don't think there are any public SAR companies, but the Maxar, maybe they've seen a little bit of improvement in their share price. But you have a few public companies who are also supporting the Ukraine effort. And the market's not recognizing how important these folks are. Now, I think that the perverse benefit of the war is it's going to be an opportunity over the next few months for all these companies to really show their capabilities. Another point, which is that one company in a sector or sensor suite, such as SAR, optical imagery, RF, none of them alone can give all the information that the end users need. So I think from a revenue standpoint, there's a lot of revenue that these companies will garner, and the importance of having multiple companies in the sector will become more evident in the next few months. But the SPAC market, there's a little discussion that earlier. I'd say it's probably pretty difficult. It seemed like that was the way to go a year ago. There's been a lot of companies who've gone public, and this is not unique to the space sector. A lot of companies have gone public via SPAC who's been, really kind of disappointed. In many cases, they're great businesses, but they probably overpromised what they could deliver in terms of revenue and ramp up. There's generally a sense also in investing, looking at particularly some of the public companies, they're burning a lot of cash. Hopefully, the revenue that will be ramping up, some due to Ukraine in the next few months, will improve things, and new investors in the sector will look at it and say, wow, okay, these models are needed. These new companies need to be funded. And it goes across Earth observation. We talked a little bit earlier. I think Jason talked a little bit about Viasat and OneWeb. I think that you're going to see a lot of interest in, call it, more proliferated communications networks. So that's jargon for LEO communications networks.
Yeah. Noel, can I just jump in here for a second?
Of course.
Are you guys at GH Partners seeing or having phone calls or conversations with people who have a commercial product but are looking at this situation and the things that Deborah and Jason described and are saying, look, Noel, you've been looking at our business plan now for a while, or Will Portia, or someone has. Can you give it a different look now, given the context of Ukraine? Are you having any conversations like that?
I think it's, right now it's more of companies that already have assets in the air. And it's giving them more attention, more traction with investors.
Yeah.
Less on the VCs, but that's also kind of the nature of our business. To approach the Will Portias of the world, a lot of those deals are done, directly without kind of a banker, but more of kind of our existing clients. And there's actually, we mentioned a bunch of companies. For every one company we mentioned here, there could be 5 or 10 companies, other companies that are involved in assisting Ukraine in one way or other in the space sector, but just keeping a low profile about it. One client of ours said, what we're doing there, we don't want to become a target, so we'll help everybody we can, but we're not going to advertise it because we don't want to become, the enemies of NATO are pretty sophisticated guys, and want to kind of stay out of it. But
exactly. Well, you've got an enemy of NATO behind you in that picture, don't you?
Oh, actually, I did have. I took it down.
Yeah,
I had.
why don't you put that back
okay,
up? We'll go to Keith, and then we'll show the audience.
I'll have to figure out how to put it back up.
Joe, thanks, Noel. Joe, did you have a question for Keith?
Well, I guess I wanted to hear Keith's initial response to my question about the perspectives on new space realities in this environment. I mean, I think Keith comes at it from a slightly different perspective. Noel is more early stage investing. Keith is more mature company investing. So maybe Keith, you want to offer your perspective?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. And thanks for the opportunity to be here. Just one more shout out of congrats to Tamara. So 21 years, awesome job. Noel hit on some great topics there, but to your point, Joe, I mean, a lot of what I've ended up dealing with throughout my career has tended to be companies that are already established, that are looking for growth, that are looking then for additional investment down the road, either via an exit or subsequent financing rounds. I think that one of the things that Noel alluded to, and from a perspective of someone who's had to go out to market a number of times with companies, the SPAC model, right, and the whole idea that these companies may not have been meeting revenue objectives, may not have been ready. The key to me has, for any company that's going out for financing, be it during, in advance of a war, if there's no war, if everything's wonderful, is how ready are you for the market to to look at your product or look at your company and say, this business is ready to be to have an event like this. And so when you look at some of these companies that potentially were ahead of where they should have been before they entered into a D-SPAC or SPAC, or however you wanted to phrase it, the war, this particular war, may in many ways accelerate then if they were ready for what was necessary to that for the market to ask of them. If they were ready to then capitalize on things that were going on there, it may give them some acceleration of their valuation. But there's a terrible flip side to that too. It may also accentuate even more why they shouldn't have been taking the path of a public offering of any type or an investment of any type. And I think there's a number of people on this call that are familiar with this. And companies that go to market at the wrong time or are ill prepared to go to market at the at any given time, or that are not ready, that haven't done their sell side diligence, that are not clean and able to articulate what the market is really asking for, but yet are out seeking capital for an investment. When events like this happen, those types of companies really can it can be highlighted just how ill prepared they are for investment.
Right. Keith, I just want to jump in here for a second because, you've said sort of famously, each time you enter into a company, you've tried to find it a better home at the end. And that infers that you have to understand the ongoing life cycle of a company and whether it is healthy enough to do certain things with regard to events. Do you see that at all changing in the current environment? Is something going to get accelerated, something going to get decelerated, or do the fundamentals still apply, or both?
I think there's a bunch of both. One of the things that again, a lot of people on this call have been, or on this meeting have been exposed to, is the person that comes up and says, our company is basically bulletproof. There's nothing in the market that will ever impact whether we have good business going forward or not. We're recession proof, we're war proof, we're whatever. That we generally can say, I think, with taking the 99s out to a lot of decimal points, is a bunch of hooey, right? No matter what happens, you could have the greatest company in the world right now that's ready to go to the next step, that all of those things, and watch what's happened to the public markets, watch what's happened to just generally people's concerns about the world, you name it. So there's tons of private equity money out there just sitting that's been committed by limited partners in big funds. And so you say, well, shoot, there's no shortage of capital. People should go ahead and fund my venture, and we're bulletproof and there's nothing bad ever could happen. But you still have reticence on the part of the general partners or anybody that's doing investing, because what's going to go on in the world. So to your point, Lou, I think it's if things happen that again create these value for the business and they're highlighted by this, great. But there's just no way in the world that these things, these events, don't adversely impact pretty much anybody that's out there trying to raise capital.
Yeah. Noel, do you generally agree with that?
Yeah.
Does this uncertainty add another component to the stew?
Yeah, another way of saying it, to use the Rumsfeldian, framework is, a lot of people, a lot of managers, entrepreneurs don't know what they don't know. And so where they would say, we do well in all markets. If we just build this, there's gonna be such demand for it. But, kind of commercial Earth observation is relatively new, and all these new sensor suites, what's going to be important. And, it seemed like there was a couple of years ago, just a bunch, way too many companies pursuing it. Well, realizing at least, in the past few weeks, there's demand for all these companies, whether though, going back to Keith's point, whether it'll be meaningful enough revenue to justify the investment in these companies, it's hard to say. And actually something that, kind of subtle that Keith said also is, sometimes these situations are not great, even though, this is the industry's time to shine. There will be some companies that do fabulously well. out of it. But there are other companies that, hey, that was your time to shine and you only made X dollars. Well, David Ogilvy had a saying, nothing sinks a lousy project better than a awesome advertising campaign or something like that, meaning
That's right.
it's time to shine and you're shining, except that, you failed to deliver. That could be really disappointing to investors. So there's going to be, and just general economic environment. It's a lot of private equity money, as Keith says, but on the other hand, a lot of the things, even companies with assets in space, they're still not ready because a lot of them haven't proven, maybe they've proven revenue, but they have not proven a path to profitability.
So no, let me try something on you here. Let's think historically, at least over 20, 30-year period. I think about two technology inflection points. One being the onset of the commercial internet in the late 90s. Another being more recent, the successful application of the mRNA vaccine during this COVID crisis. At each point that we have a technology inflection, either where a new technology comes and we're trying to figure out what to do with it, like with the internet, or there's a pressing need, like the COVID crisis, and we have a technology come forward that is a significant solution to that crisis. In both cases, it's obvious that everything is going to change. In the late 90s, we all knew the internet was going to change everything. We just didn't know exactly how. During COVID, we knew everything had to change, and thank goodness the mRNA vaccine came forward, and we're at some degree of normalcy right now. But in each of those periods, investors are faced with a very big challenge. How do I handle this opportunity? I would offer that Elon Musk's Falcon 9 was a similar disruptor for the space industry, specifically Elon's Falcon 9. SpaceX did not invent space. I'm sorry, you can let Elon down and let him know that he did not invent space. The technology's been there.
Nobody tell him.
That seismic shift in our visibility, our view of launch. Before that, you had to launch a $400 million Delta IV or an expensive Atlas V. Elon comes forward, and now we're popping them up at $60 million a piece. It is a game changer. It's a sea state change. But at every inflection point like that, we're trying to figure out what is the right way to look at the pragmatic economics of the market. How do you help companies or investors navigate this? From an instantaneous perspective, we don't have enough data. We're all trying to figure out what is the right way to go. But when we think about it historically, the comment you just made, I thought was really effective. We thought there were too many Earth remote sensing companies, and now we see maybe there aren't enough. How do you help folks navigate through that? And I'm going to ask both of you to answer that. And I expect Noel to look at it from an early stage company and maybe Keith to look at it from an evolving later stage company.
Yeah, and Joe, we'd also, if Deborah is still with us, maybe we should bring her in on this as well. So go ahead, guys.
Yeah, and by the way, we work with late stage companies as well. But I'll take the other side of the for make sure we fill it out. Yeah, you kind of the point exactly though about the real inflection point for the industry was the Falcon 9, and I don't think the new space industry would exist or even be, or at least not be as robust as it is if the cost of access to space drastically reduced from where it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, as well as, reliability. So launch insurance, reflecting launch insurance, but just reliability that I could say I could launch and it could get up. And that's attributable to Elon Musk, SpaceX, and doing things differently. I think that there's another inflection point going to happen with, constantly plenty of other companies or our European colleagues will say, he can't do it, but he always does, apparently. The Starship's going to be another kind of inflection point there. And just the mass capability and opening up new business models that previously were not economically viable. Where I think we are, and it's not, these things don't happen overnight, is that, as a result of the inflection point in launch and access to space, then a whole bunch of business plans became available. Another huge inflection point is change in manufacturing. It's no longer a business of $250 million geocommunication satellites. It's folks really kind of pushing the envelope in terms of what they can manufacture spacecraft for. Very, very different than it was even 3-4 years ago. CubeSats have really been very effective in pushing that envelope. But where we are in the cycle is you have the inflection point, and then you have the new business models, and it takes time for those new business models to prove themselves out and become the late stage companies. And so kind of going back to a point is, with any sort of investor, they're going to ask, okay, what's my exit? Is it going to be acquired by strategic, meaning a big company? And, right now it takes time, and I think we'll have some very interesting, big strategic exits. You've seen a couple in the past year. But I think that's, we're in the cycle, and we're going to go through another cycle again with kind of, as I said, with Starship. And there's an ongoing cycle in inflection point in manufacturing ongoing. And we're, still trying to digest those points. I'll hand it over to Keith to take a different view or add to that.
I think probably tying on to the experience that you've had, Noel, with as you move later into a company's life cycle, I think you've hit it sort of with Starship that this is there's a business that's already existing, that's been doing great work, that's got great exposure, that's got all those sorts of things, can now move into another segment and innovate and disrupt and do everything else that it's, from that perspective. I think that's a key with companies that are, the difference between an early stage and a medium to a later stage. When a while back, I was running an antenna, satellite earth station manufacturing business that was needed to be lean and mean to compete against all the other folks. And one of the things that we had was these great opportunities at sort of historic, traditional applications and revenues and things like that, which was excellent for us because we were able to have this steady state amount of business, but we were also had the luxury, because we did have the steady state of revenue and the base of revenue and earnings, to then look at the, skate to where the puck is going, not where it is now approach. And so HTS was lots and lots of talk, but nobody had actually really launched any HTS satellites. Nobody was really, had really thought it through. When the press coverage was coming out on HTS, we were already, a year into designs and tooling up the manufacturing facility and doing all those sorts of things to make sure we were ready and building earth stations for people that would, potentially then be launching their HTS systems. And that did give us a pretty solid edge in beating out some of our competitors for that. But that's the luxury of a later stage company versus, I've just launched a company that is going to address a certain market. I have nothing to support my business except going out and chasing down third party or outside investment. I have nothing to prove out that I can even make what I say I'm going to make because I don't have a historical track record. So I think that becomes the big difference. And like I say, it's in some ways a luxury for those people in the later stage, so long as they're in that innovation mode and haven't gotten too big.
Yeah, and Keith, as I recall, you guys were also looking at the multi-band product as well, so that when we had constellations, in different orbits, you would address those. So again, you had the luxury to do that, but you had to have that thought and make that commitment and then execute, what you guys did there. The other, we've got Deborah on. I wanted to bring Deborah in on this as well, because she had given us that report on Earth observation. Deborah, maybe picking up on Noel's suggestion that maybe there is now going to be an opportunity for more EO models going forward, maybe with more cyber, because I know you're doing a report on cyber. You want to talk to that a little bit?
There's also a very interesting conversation going on in the chat associated with this about the breadth of Earth observation that we've seen here. It's easy to focus on the imagery, but we've also been getting reports. We've seen the value of radio frequency monitoring throughout the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We saw reports on where various forces were moving based on their radio signals, in addition to their visual, the visual imagery. We've seen, we saw night imagery showing how Ukraine has turned off lights at night, whether that's because facilities have been destroyed, but in many cities, they've also said, please turn off all your lights. It's just been an amazing time to show what this remote sensing in its various forms can do. GPS was denied so that to try to disrupt the drones that Ukraine was using. There was a lot of GPS denial, showing the value of alternative precision navigation and timing services. Whether that all translates to business, I feel like we'll have to see. There was a report at South by Southwest that there was 4 times the demand for Earth imagery that is available, which is surprising because there is a lot available.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Go ahead, Noel, please.
So I was going to add something to Deborah. I mean, just kind of, and also I saw in the one thing I saw in the chat was some questions about SAR. So optical, we only can see sunlight and clear skies. SAR, see any time of day. Another key point though is fusing all these data sets that Deborah mentioned, and that I think is, Joe, you brought up the point about inflection points. And a huge inflection point will be once you have fusion of whether it be RF saying, hey, we're identifying a behavior in a specific location and we can really accurately pinpoint it. And there are a couple companies that can do that. And tipping off, okay, let's get SAR imagery or optical imagery over that location and being able to do it, very quickly. That is tremendous insight. And we kind of, talked about defense. We really talked about a lot about defense applications here. So many of these things are also applicable to the civil sector. So we may perfect them in what's effectively a, wartime, but, like so many technologies that are developed in the time of, war or perfected in the time of war, the applications in the civilian or commercial sector are multitudes of that.
And they almost seem to run parallel in our time, don't they? Yeah.
So I'd say kind of, I'll call it, Joe, you want, going back to your inflection points, fusion of data for Earth observation is the next inflection point, because every one of these little, every one of these data sets is worth a whole lot more if they're fused, integrated. I think that's going to be, and it's both the folks collecting the data as well as the folks in the analytical side.
Keith, can I just ask you, you're listening to them, your thing is really taking these companies, as you said earlier, and implementing the innovations. Do you hear from Deborah and Noel areas of innovation where Earth observation might take a sort of a mini inflection point as it's inflecting everything else?
The answer is yes. I'll be honest with you, I don't think I could articulate it well enough here, but I mean, there's so much going on. And I think Noel hit it, that when you talk about integrating all these data sets and, the company that we just sold, it was very good at doing that. Had a product that from a terrestrial standpoint, so take it off of the space for a second, but from a terrestrial weather, gathering all kinds of different pieces of data so that people who were looking at a specific location and a specific operation of a data center or of any type of technology could gather all of these pieces of information overlaid onto a single type of a single screen on a single piece of geography and understand it really well. And that the uptake on that was pretty incredible, how well people wanted to do that. That's a simplified terrestrial kind of an approach. Certainly I could see that, as Noel said, I mean, when you do that with all of the Earth observation tied all together into a single, gathering all that information and unifying it. I think that's a pretty impressive opportunity for sure.
Yeah.
And actually, I'll do a plug for Oracle, where I guess, Keith, you're now part of Oracle. This is a huge big data problem, integrating multiple systems, having a database that's accurate, can do time series analysis. So it's also something that I've seen historically in the industry, that the space industry in a lot of cases historically thought it was its own thing. The Earth observation is bringing in so many other disciplines in terms of analytics, data science, data management, visualization, link analysis, bringing in, to use a jargon, OSINT, open source intelligence into this. So there's whole, another layer of how to make this all very valuable sets of data that our friends in the industry are collecting in space.
Yeah. Just for the record, Keith sold his company, Federos, to Oracle not too long ago. That's why he looks so relaxed and happy.
And for clarification, for clarification, I should probably say I am no longer with Oracle, effectively about a week ago. So
okay, I didn't get the newsletter.
The
exactly.
lawyer just called, and
I should. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Oracle's calling me saying, "Stop it." No, I'm kidding. So
yeah. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank
Joe,
you.
we've got to wrap it up. I'm going to turn it over to you. But Deborah, last word to you on EO. Is there any last thought that you want to share with us?
What Noel said about fusion,
Okay.
it's using these is difficult. It's going to require a lot of computing power, a lot of machine learning, but if you can do it rapidly and well, that is the holy grail.
Very good.
Well,
Joe,
thank you. Just to
over to
wrap
you.
up a few thoughts here. I want to thank everyone for their participation today as we kind of tried to grapple with the issues at hand. Every crisis provides an opportunity, and this very unfortunate crisis has given us the chance to take a look at this industry from a new perspective. This is what we try to do in the New York Space Business Roundtable, is take hard looks at issues, take a step back. We're not promoting anything. We're not trying to sell anything. We're not trying to do anything but create a greater awareness in this industry, because we believe this industry can play a very important role in the progress of mankind, quite frankly, in helping us get the correct perspective on the potential impacts and opportunities in new and commercial space. So with that, Noel, Keith, Deborah, thank you very much for joining.
And Jason.
And I'll turn it over to
Jason.
you and sorry, Jason as well. I'll turn it over to you, Lou, or Tamara, to discuss our upcoming events.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And again, thanks everyone for making the time to do this. And we'll probably have to have another discussion and talk about things like how LEO is going to impact the DoD through the Office of Satellite Communications. And, Sandra Irwin wrote a terrific piece on that in the November issue of Space News, which I'd encourage you to look at. Okay, well, let's take a look before we go to our big question, what's coming up here. Some upcoming events. We'll have a short series on how our industry is impacting gross domestic local product in regions that were not considered space centers, as well as ones that are adapting to the new reality of the industry from a financial and economic development perspective. And that'll be at our next roundtable next month on the third Wednesday of the month. And we're going to start with Scotland, what we're calling the new space empire. And we're going to do an hour-long dive into that economy there, into the companies that are up there, and see what's going on, because there is evidently an awful lot going on. As I mentioned, we've got Satellite coming up next week. Many of you will no doubt be there. Of note, if you're a woman in the industry, SSPI Wise is hosting a happy hour at Satellite, and that takes place Monday, March 22nd from 4 o'clock to 5:30 p.m. And that will be at the hotel lobby bar at the Marriott Marquis in Washington. So Nicole Robinson and some of our leadership on the board hope to see you there. Yesterday, some of you were involved. SSPI inducted 7 people into the Industry Hall of Fame. And so we would just like to acknowledge them. It's Frank Del Bello, the president and CEO of Space Florida. The 3 founders of Planet Labs were inducted: Will Marshall, Robbie Shingler, and Dr. Christopher Bashuzin. Steve Spengler, the CEO of Intelsat, and Professor Robert Twiggs, an emeritus professor of astronautics at Morehead State University. They now become part of industry immortality as inductees of the Hall of Fame. And you can meet some of them in Washington if you're lucky enough to be invited to the VIP party to celebrate them. I don't think I'm even invited to that one. Our podcast every Monday, The Better Satellite World, which we've been trying to create here through our roundtable, as Joe said. Every Monday, we have a podcast. And this week, we're actually going to rebroadcast last month's roundtable, which people have told us they want to hear it again. And so if you haven't heard it, you can tune in on Monday, wherever you get your podcasts. And we look forward to you being part of that listening audience. Okay, we're about ready to ask our big question, which I said at the outset was, how will the Ukraine war impact the future of space financing? And we look forward to hearing your answers. And now, Tamara, back over to you to run that segment.
Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for participating in today's roundtable. As promised, we are at 101. The official program is over, but we are now in our big question segment. If you would like to participate in this big question segment, you're invited to stay. We will unmute everyone. Please use the raise your hand function so that we can call on you to give your answers. And we are off to the races. All right. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, have we given everybody permission to unmute? Yes, now we have, okay. Okay, you all now have permission to unmute yourselves. Please raise your hand. And if you have a question, I'm super happy to call on you and hear what you got to say.
And the question again is, how will Ukraine impact the future of space financing? I think we've gone through a little bit of that today. Well, you know what, while we've still got Noel and Keith with us, guys, you want to take the first shot at that? I mean, we've talked about it today, but you know, maybe there's more to say. Noel, I think you're on mute.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah, you're good.
Right. Yeah, I think kind of just generally, just from a macro level, the Wall Street term is we're in a risk-off environment, meaning investors want less risk. They're looking for more stable, less venture-oriented. That being said, venture capital has had a huge influx of money. They've had some real successes in the sector. But generally, there's been, so for example, a lot of business flown in one sense, folks doing stuff up at the space station. There's a lot of concern about what happens up at the space station. So business models around the space station might be, a little bit at risk. On the other hand, I want to say that NASA is sponsoring, 4 new space stations. So, okay, people all of a sudden realize, well, from a humankind standpoint, we love the idea of these almost intergovernment entities that are doing, the ISS. On the other hand, it's going to, shows the reason to have a business model that works for, independent space stations. So that could potentially, be an interesting area. I think we've, defense applications, those are still pretty interesting. And, even if it's, you may see some uptick in revenue in these companies as a result of Ukraine. But on the other hand, it also, my view is it's going to exemplify that these business models and the importance of them is here to stay. And right now, there's a huge amount of the capacity in the Earth observation sector that's being put down. And look at what's going on in Ukraine. Well, okay, 4 months ago, that was in Afghanistan, with the fall of Afghanistan. And it's always going to be the South China Sea. So you're going to see actually, need for more assets, more, constant monitoring of all these different regions, areas of interest. So I think it's actually, what's gone on is really kind of highlighted a lot of what's going on, and hopefully will attract investors, and they'll see the returns that they want.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Noel.
I've got my hand up.
Cameron, I
so
saw
I'm-
your hand up. Yes.
Yes. So I think this is a question for Keith, but anybody can jump in. I was just thinking about this question of war and organizing our businesses around war. Obviously there is an economic side to that, and we don't necessarily, I don't want to see companies be dependent on war business. We want to see companies be able to be structured to be sustainable through peace. So as companies are ramping up, are we thinking about, or are they situated effectively as we think about new business emerging from this Ukraine situation? Are they situated to also transition out of war footing?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think we talked a little bit about it before, the convergence of commercial and military, if you will, technologies and those sorts of things create opportunities, obviously, for that, from that perspective. I think, Tamara, though, the companies, my personal feeling on this, and certainly when running companies that were providing products into the defense industry, I'm much more interested in us creating products that prevent war than I am in products that are used in war. Right now, they might ultimately be used, but boy, if prevention is far better. If you think through some of that, you think through the intelligence that comes from space on being able to see what is going on the Earth as a result of this discussion we've had on Earth observation. You see how that has impacted our ability to maybe head off potential conflict. If we can continue to do that, if we can continue to monitor better, all those things. I don't mean to necessarily say we have to get bigger bombs, but those deterrents that we have, the technology that we've used, that we've developed and used that are deterrents, and then subsequently have put into the commercial space, again, not bombs, but the other stuff, in the commercial space, then that's to me is a great outcome from that. And I think Deborah had also mentioned, that the thing on talent too. We didn't talk about that before, but you talk about an impact, a potential really positive impact of this terrible environment that we're in right now, is all of this technology that is coming to the forefront that the general public is seeing in use, and continuing to escalate our visibility in the space industry and capturing new talent. I think that's a big one to keep pointing to.
Yeah, that's a great point, Keith. And you caught that. Does anybody in the audience want to add to that?
Yeah, and actually, though, I'd just like to kind of bridge the, so make sure we don't sound like a bunch of, war is good for business kind of folk. But if we think about all these assets in space, one of the issues of using kind of, let's say, imagery from space has been for, let's say, agriculture and improving yields. And we know that we're going into a crisis, going to end up in a wheat crisis in the next year. Okay, well, a lot of the NRE and CapEx of putting all these assets in space, we've developed a lot of applications and a lot of sensors. Well, now all of a sudden, agriculture may not be the most lucrative market to service, but we've already incurred the fixed cost, the marginal cost of delivering those images to the agriculture sector and making that more productive. That is one of the huge benefits. The analogy I always think about, I used to do a lot of work for Polaroid. Joe being from Rochester, I know he's partial to Kodak, but Polaroid started out as, their big thing was polarized lenses in World War II. And, you think of all things that are polarized these days, and it's not just your sunglasses. And so I think there's just, it's hard to fathom what the applications of all these things are, but huge benefits to humanity, particularly as we figure out how to feed the world. And I know it's a constant theme of the SSPI of, satellites for a better world.
Right.
That's where you're going to see a huge benefit of this huge investment.
Yeah, and as Tamara said, maybe beat some swords into plowshares at some point. We can probably do that because we're already the ones who monitor nuclear compliance treaties from the sky. We've been doing that since day one. Dave Hirschberg, one of our Hall of Fame inductees, developed the hotline in 1963 between Moscow and Washington. So we've had our hand in that peacemaking for a long time. We just need to dig in a little harder on it. Joe, as we dance out of here, one issue that I'm really concerned about, because it is very implicit in our industry and in human life altogether, is the levels of trust that might get eroded as a result of things like sanctions. Obviously war, that's a sort of a non sequitur in terms of what happens to trust. What the Russians are saying, refusing to launch OneWeb, all of these things that are happening across the board, both financially and politically. Are we at risk of seeing trust diminish in the industry, which could sink the ability to do the kinds of things we need to do collaboratively?
Yeah, I guess I would argue, Lou, that leaders are showing their true colors. Okay, there have been a lot of differing opinions on, different forms of government and leadership, but I think Putin has showed his colors. And it's unfortunate for the excellent, Soyuz launch vehicle and the Kazakhstan launch facility, but I think that the trust was always in question before, and the geopolitical threat on the RD-180 engines. I'm glad that Blue Origin has started our own line. So I would argue that the trust was never there. And this has been a weapon that's been held onto the throat of free commerce. And let us ride our broomsticks to space 2.0 and 3.0.
Okay. By the way, you're living in Rochester. What kind of broomsticks are they using up there?
Only the best.
They use snow shovels, huge snow shovels.
These days,
We ride our snow shovels to space. That's right.
Very good. Well, listen, again, thanks to everyone. Special shout out to the person you don't see, Matt Owen, who's been running the gears behind the scenes here. Tamara, again, congratulations on 21 years of living with Robert Bell and myself. I don't know how you do it personally. But
she deserves an award just for that.
That's for sure. Keith
21 years
Buckley's
is nice,
his...
but living with you guys.
Yeah, Saint Tamara.
That's right.
Thank you so much.
Sainthood is waiting.
I have enjoyed. I want to say, I always get to say it since we're at 3 minutes to go. I want to say that I super enjoy being a part of this industry. And I'm very, very grateful that we are having these monthly conversations so that we can expand our awareness and drive home the value on a regular basis of what our industry is able to do. So thank you for letting me be a part.
Well, here, and thank you for producing the roundtable for us. And then finally, many thanks to the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office here in New York for their support. And of course, our media partner, Space News. We really appreciate them, again, making two of their top writers available to us today. With that, Joe, I'm going to sign off. Tamara, I think it's time to go home.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next month.
See you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.